All right, we're going to talk about special use airspace now. Hopefully, you've already reviewed Class B, C, D, and E airspace. Um, so the next kind of airspace in the National Airspace System is special use. This particular, and there's a link in the lesson for this particular graphic. This is a website, FAA-based website, that tells the current status of these special use airspace areas. So there's a number of ones here. There's prohibited areas, restricted areas, warning areas, um, alert areas, military operation areas, national security areas, listed on this chart. The colors have a meaning. If they're red, it's active. Right now, they're active. Then there's like it looks like a yellow. No, it looks like an orange. Within an hour, it's become active. And then, well, you can read the legend at the bottom of the thing, or you can go to that link and find out what's active today. This is an old chart now because I recorded this a few days ago. So anyway, special use airspace. It's not controlled airspace like BCD, Class BCD, but it is to some extent controlled. We find a little bit about this, a little bit of a glimpse into this by going to 14 CFR Part 73, which talks about special use airspace. You don't really need to go there because it's really pretty simple. There's subpart C is prohibited areas, and we'll start with that anyway, and then there's restricted areas, etc. So prohibited areas, you can read for yourself. 83 restrictions, 73.83, or Part 73, paragraph 83. No person may operate an aircraft within a prohibited area unless authorization has been gained prior to operation. So it's sort of like controlled airspace, but it's not really, because it's, generally speaking, you're going to have a really hard time getting permission to fly in those areas. So we'll flip the page. So here's an example of one. By the way, on the right side there, it has, that's the current, all of the prohibited areas in the United States. District of Columbia, obviously Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. The bottom one, Kennebunkport, Maine. That's where the ex-president lives, apparently. So I'm not sure where Jimmy Carter, I don't see him listed, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyway, we look at that and it says P50, so we can say, okay, it must be Kings Bay, Georgia. What's in Kings Bay, Georgia? Well, they don't need to tell you because they don't want you to be there. But we can do a little research and find out. It's not like a great mystery, but it's just north of Jacksonville, Florida, and it's the submarine base. They don't want anybody spying in there. But can you not fly over it at all? Is that like the space shuttle can't go over it? I mean, the International Space Center? No. Then we got to look at the edge of the chart, and we find the special use airspace part. So whatever chart, this happens to be on the Jacksonville sectional chart, so that's where you'd find this, on the Jacksonville sectional chart. You look around there and it says P, remember it was P50, so that's actually the top one. So it says P50 right there, and it says from the ground up to 3,000, but not including 3,000 feet. It's continuous in use, always active. No AG just means there's no air-ground communication. You can't call them on the radio and get permission to fly over there. No, it's just all the time active, P50. That's where you find this information. Of course, there's this little legend up there that tells you all this stuff about it. But special use airspace on the Jacksonville chart. Prohibited areas basically contain airspace, which flights are, all aircraft flights are prohibited. All right, so security, maybe something to do with national welfare. Published on the Federal Register, they change from time to time, but it's got a P with a number. Camp David, National Mall, White House, etc., etc. Yeah, right. Then we have restricted areas. Okay, so that's Part 73. 13, restrictions, using agency, etc., controlling agency, right? So we can't enter those. It's similar in the extent that we can have to get permission or find out when they're not active. So restricted is slightly less prohibitive, obviously. That's why it's called restricted. They're areas where operations are hazardous to aircraft, and though it may not be totally prohibited, subject to some restrictions. In other words, you need to get permission from the controlling agency. It basically tells you that there's some kind of unusual, invisible, maybe hazard to aircraft, like aerial gunnery, guided missiles, maybe aerobatic aircraft, or something like military. Basically, it's typically military, not necessarily always. So anyway, we flip the page, and we see this one here. R3002, so we've got to look really carefully because it's really hard to see. R3002 D, E, and F. So there's D, T3, D, F, and I guess AE, I guess, that tells you about them. So there's a mixture of those within that airspace. So yeah, I get it. It's a little bit complicated, but you can see if you're in the D part, it's from the ground to 8,000 feet, but it starts at 6 o'clock and goes to 2 o'clock in the morning. And talks about where Atlanta radar, Atlanta air traffic control. Here's one here, the F one. If you're in that section, it starts at 14,000 feet up to 250. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but the lowest one is the one that you're really concerned about. But again, they're found on the special use airspace listing on the edge of whatever chart you're looking at. In this case, we're looking at the Atlanta sectional chart, so it's there. It's denoted by, very much like the prohibited area, it's denoted by, I like to call it a shag carpet around that area. All this area here, down here, all the way around there, all that, right? Looks like sort of like a shag carpet to me. So if the restricted area is not active, you can fly through it. If it's active and not released by the FAA, you would need to get a clearance to fly through it. So somewhat restricted. But something's going on in there which could be hazardous to the operation. So that's restricted areas. Restricted areas, you need permission. Prohibited areas, you need permission, but generally speaking, you're just prohibited. Then we have military operating areas. Military operating areas are basically military operating. I don't know what more you can say about it except it's military operating areas. So therefore, it could be high speed, could be things falling out of airplanes like people with parachutes, or it may be bombs or something like that, something significant. Well, probably not bombs. That's very unlikely. But and so you can go through those, though. It's on sectionals, but it's not prohibited to fly in there. We can fly in there. That's not a problem. They're just MOA, just giving you the information that there's a possibility of something going on there. And the same thing before. Typically, though, they are, AB, military MOAs, always desert MOAs. So we look down there till we see Bulldog A. Bulldog A is this one here. It starts at 10,000 feet, way above us. And it's between 7 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. Is that 2? No, midnight. I'm sorry. Intermittent, though, which means we want to check with the controlling facility. They may. By the way, for us, calling the military up and asking, that's not how we do it. What we do is we call flight service station. That's the 1-800-WX-BRIEF phone number, and we say, hey, we're going to be operating, in this case, at Hacienda de Gay Airport right down there. Is that military? Is the Bulldog military operating area? Are they active? And they say yes or no. And if that just gives you some assurance. I mean, it's not getting permission. It's just finding out whether they're active. You can do that also on the internet site, 1-800-WXBRIEF.com. But you can call either one. And that's what you would also do with the restricted areas and the prohibited areas. That's where we get the information. They don't give you permission, but they tell you whether or not it's active or not. So military operating areas, MOAs. Training activities basically for IFR traffic, but for us it's just a heads up place. Alert areas, okay. Alert areas are got an A, which makes sense, right? So we're looking at the alert area 381. So then we look on the, where do we look? We look at the special use airspace on the edge of the chart. 381 is right here. It says surface to 2,000 feet. So what's going on in there? Could be a number of things. Could be just a lot of traffic. Okay, when pilots want to learn how to fly, they go to what they call a practice area, and then they're doing turns and spins and stalls and all the stuff that you need to learn in order to be a private pilot or a pilot in general. They're pretty busy learning and doing their thing, so they may not be too alert about what's going around them. That's a little hazardous. So there might be a lot of airplanes out there training, or it may be somebody, an aerobatic pilot that's doing aerobatic exercises to get really good so they can compete. It might be the military, possibly, but it's just a general area where everybody pay attention. There's a lot of aircraft flying around this area. High volume of pilot training or an unusual type of aerial activity is what the FAA says. So what they're telling you is pilots should exercise caution in those areas. They'll be operating within regulation. Nobody's going to be doing things that are against the regulation, and we know it doesn't matter where we are or what we're doing as pilots. Pilots are responsible for traffic separation. For collision avoidance, that's the job of the pilots, not the FAA, not air traffic controllers. Again, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. By the way, hang on. Can't go back. Oh well. We'll keep going. So, okay, now we have warning areas. Warning areas are, again, a little bit different, but they're sort of same. They're just warning you that there may be some activity there that would be similar to a restricted area or a alert area, but it's generally speaking extending out from about 3 miles out from the coast of the states containing activities that may be hazardous, again, to non-participating aircraft. So what's that got to do with us, right? Right. So that's that 3 mile mark right there. That little blue shag carpet going around. That's the 3 mile mark. So this area, this area here is that warning area. Yeah, you might be out fishing and want to fly your drone. Just be aware. It's a warning that there's something going on there. And so you can look at it. W453, W453A and B. Well, there they are. There's A and there's B. So surface up to 6,000, and then the B is 6,000 to 60,000, way up there. It's just telling you that there's a possibility of activity that might be hazardous. Okay. Something else on this page that I want to cover as long as we're here. No, I have another slide. Stand by. Then we have national security areas. Okay, they're marked with this magenta dashed line. Okay, that should ring a bell. Magenta dashed line. Didn't he tell me over and over and over and over again that that's surface class E? But this isn't. For two reasons you can tell, because first off, it's not a circle or a circle around an airport. It's irregular shape. And the other is it's got a big call out thing in the same color, magenta color. It says notice, for reasons of national security, right? National security area, pilots are requested to avoid this flight at and below 2,000 feet MSL in that area. Why? Well, you really can't tell where this is, but this is Plant Vogtle in Georgia. It's a nuclear power plant. So that's part of our infrastructure, national infrastructure. The power grid is extremely important, and it's actually pretty vulnerable to terrorist activity. So they're pretty sensitive about you airplanes flying low over there. And they're not going to shoot you down. You're not going to be in trouble. But they're going to be curious. They're going to track you and figure out where you land, and then they're going to, or where you are. And of course, now that we have remote ID, they know where you are, and they know, and your aircraft's registered, so they know who you are. So they're going to come, FBI, CIA, whoever is going to show up at your door, may show up at your door and go, "What were you doing buzzing the nuclear power plant?" And then you got to explain yourself because they're asking politely, are requested to avoid flight. Then you got to, well, you just don't want to go through all that. Restricted areas or prohibited areas. Oh, no, this is a national security area. Okay, and there won't be anything on the edge of the chart with this. It just should be a call out on the page. It's not that many of them, but I imagine, I'm not sure, I can't remember where the Fort Knox, where they keep all the gold. That may be another one of those areas. Okay, yeah, back to the slide. That's where I was going before, but I've forgotten. Anyway, contiguous U.S. ADIZ. It's called an air defense zone. That's what ADIZ stands for. So if you're coming from Cuba, maybe, or wherever, you're flying over this way at like 200 feet above the ground, they've got really good radar in South Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, super high. Sometimes they're on the cable that goes way up in the sky, so they shoot, the radar comes down. They can see boats on the water. You could be flying from South America, Central America, or on a boat. They're going to find you. So what you need to do if you're a commercial, or if you're a pilot, doesn't matter whether you're commercial or not, if a private pilot, whatever, if you're flying from Cuba, let's say, there's legal ways to do that. If you're flying into the United States, you need to tell them ahead of time. You have to tell the government ahead of time, I'm going to be entering the airspace of the United States at this particular time. Please don't shoot me down. They're not going to shoot you down, but they're going to track you and follow you, and they're going to, wherever you land, you'll probably be met by the local sheriff, and he'll be asking you, well, so what you got on the airplane? Or if you pull into the port, pull up to the dock, there'll be a sheriff or something there waiting for you. That's happened to me, but it was perfectly legitimate. I just forgot to activate my flight plan. So that was a long time ago. Ask me about it later. So basically, it's just an identification zone. So pretty unlikely that you're flying a drone that far out. So we're talking about 50 miles or so. It's a good long ways out. Chances are you're not going to enter the country from there. But just so you know what that means, that's what it means. And again, it's different. It's not a shag carpet kind of thing, right? The warning area is about these shag carpet kind of stuff. This is a whole different thing, just dots. Just so you know, just whatever. All right, the other thing is controlled firing areas. They're termed CFAs. They're not charted. They're not on the chart. Why aren't they charted? I would like to know if they're shooting rockets and artillery. Well, they have a guy out there from the military, and he's a spotter. He's got binoculars. As soon as he sees an airplane approaching the airspace, he calls on the radio or sets off an alarm or something like that, and they stop shooting. So they have a spotter. So you don't need to be listed on the chart, but just be aware that there are certain areas that are, but that's all controlled by the military. The military shuts the whole thing down. Nobody shoots. Now, if you have a drone flying over that area, the only reason I put this particular chart up here, it doesn't say chart CFAs or controlled firing areas, but we know that that's what they do down there at the Army base down there. Anyway, we know that they do that. Not all the time, but sometimes. Weapons training. You got to learn. You got to have those guys crawling through the foxholes, and you got to have them have some experience with bombs going off nearby. Yeah, controlled firing areas. Not a big deal, but just be aware. Okay, military training routes called MTRs. They are military training routes. That's what I just said, didn't I? But they are possibly high-speed aircraft, could be helicopters, a training route. They basically have to learn how to fly, to navigate, and so they have these routes set up all over the country. The thing you need to know is that if it's got 4 digits, example, VR 1050, that means it can be 1,500 feet or lower. Air traffic can be 1,500 feet. This military air traffic could be below 1,500 feet above the ground. Of course, that implies that, right, let me write that down so you got that as soon as I can get my pen to work here. 1,500 above ground level, so they could be below that. So just for you, so you know, we got a tower here, right? So it's 265 above the ground. So 265, we're allowed to fly how much above that tower once we get our Part 107? 400 feet above it, 665 feet AGL, we're allowed to fly that high, and they can fly 1,500 feet or lower, so they could be flying at 500 feet above the ground. That could be interesting, right? So there's a possible hazard there. Not that we need to be totally paranoid about it. And of course, the same thing applies. We can call Flight Service Station or look on the website at flight service or at 1-800-WX-BRIEF.com and search for that VR 1050 and find out if it's active today or whatever day that you have the mission to do this, right? So this guy is flying along, buzzing along here, coming up here. You just don't want to meet him. Simple. So 1,500 feet. The 4 digits means possibly 1,500 feet or lower. Possible high-speed traffic or helicopters popping over the hill at low altitude. Okay. And next page. Trying to put this all together, we can look something like this at the Kennedy Space Center. It can be very complicated because we've got warning areas, we've got restricted areas, we've got ADIZ areas here. Then we have different classes. We got D airspace here, C airspace here. Got some blue airspace here, right? That's B airspace. Then we got a little bit of surface E. We got a lot of stuff going on here. But there's a reason for it. We got rockets being fired off, like Elon Musk is sending them off. SpaceX is sending them off like every day. It's pretty restricted airspace. But you can parse through it and figure out each one of those things and get permission to do this and that, possibly. So it can be very complicated, but it can be very simple. For the purpose of the written test, it's not that complicated. Here's another example. We've had, you may or may not be aware, there is restricted areas down along the coast of Florida, Pensacola, this Pensacola area. A292 has a call out there that gives an extra warning. You should be looking at the edge of your chart, but still, it says caution, high volume of rotary helicopters, fixed wing training, surface up to 17,500 feet. So if there's some areas there. 2908, do a little bit of research online, and here we look at this. We got here 29.8. What? So this is the dimensions of it. Surface of 12,000 feet. November, December, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 local time. Controlling agency FAA Pensacola. Oh, look, using agency U.S. Navy Demonstration Squadron Pensacola National Naval Air Station. The Blue Angels, cool. So lots of airspace out there. So hopefully this video wasn't too long, but okay, that's it. So I'm gonna have a quiz after this. So take the quiz and good luck.